Everyone seems to be talking about the price we've brought in on pollution. Nobody is talking about the Canada carbon rebate that puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 families across the country.
So what are you going to say to Mr. Fury, though, specifically? Do you think he's a short-term thinker?
I think Mr. Fury is continuing to bow to political pressure.
Well, that was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today in Montreal, pushing back on premiers who have called on the federal government to pause a planned increase to the carbon tax for April 1st. Now, in a statement, Premier Fury responded saying he believes in the importance of mitigating climate change, but says a tax isn't the right instrument to do so. So is the Prime Minister right about Premier Fury, or will he have to back down before April 1st? Let's bring in the front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now principal at Shakti Strategies. Melanie Paradis is a former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. Former Ontario NDP MPP Gurdatin Singh, he's now vice president of Crestview Strategies. He's also the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And joining me in studio, CTV News senior digital parliamentary reporter, Rachel Aiello. Happy Friday, all. I almost got through that without one mistake, but hey, it's Friday. Sabrina, let's start with you. The Prime Minister didn't really mince words today when he was asked what he thought of Premier Fury. Is this going to cause a real rift between the two Liberal leaders?
I think at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is looking out for himself and for Canadians. And I think that the message that he's presenting is the message that we need to be hearing on the carbon tax and on climate change, right? The Conservatives have really weaponized this narrative on the carbon tax. They've tied it to inflation. They're saying it's an affordability issue. And I think that has played really well in the provinces, and that's what they're tying their horses to. But at the end of the day, it's been proven time and time again that carbon tax hasn't been a major contributor to inflation. It hasn't been a major contributor to the affordability tax. And I think the Prime Minister is right to say that when you think about all of the impacts of climate change, all I see is money going up in flames or, in a flood. Like, the price that we have to pay to mitigate climate change is important. And I think that that's where the Prime Minister is taking his cues from. And that's the lens he's providing to Canadians.
Melanie, it's interesting because even in the last election, your former boss, Aaron O'Toole, had a price on carbon in his platform. So we know there is an affordability crisis right now, but how did the Conservatives abandon that idea seemingly in droves?
Well, the reality is the affordability crisis is immense. And the Liberals acknowledged this just last fall when they put an exemption for the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada on home heating. They recognized then that they couldn't increase the cost of home heating going into the winter for the Atlantic provinces. They didn't grant that exemption to anybody else, even though homes across the rest of the country are also heated on natural gas in many places. And so they know that they couldn't afford to increase it then politically. They couldn't take the political heat for it in order to help people keep heating their homes. And they really shouldn't this time either. But they're really latching on to it. I think in turn because they took so much heat in the fall for pausing the carbon tax increase in Atlantic Canada, and for that acknowledgement that this is impacting affordability. That's really at the crux of what the Liberals are trying to argue, is that this isn't about affordability, this is about the environment, but ultimately this is what Canadians are feeling in their pocketbooks. And they're really worried about how this is going to keep increasing the cost of food and everything that we do in this country.
Gurdatin, in November, the NDP backed the Conservatives on a motion to pause the carbon tax on home heating fuel. So does Trudeau have any kind of political cover to walk this back even just a little?
So let's kind of lay it all out there right now. We know that the climate crisis is real. We're seeing right now already the forest fire season is starting in Alberta, up north, in areas that we've never seen this kind of forest fires occur. They're happening already. And we know that there's a devastating economic impact to this climate crisis. So we do need a price on pollution. What we have here, though, is once again, the Liberals failing to either communicate and to properly put out a policy that doesn't have these exemptions that pokes these huge holes in their armor, like what they did in Eastern Canada. So this is, once again, I would say it's a failure of the Liberals, and it's also the Conservatives really trying to capitalize off of something that has the fate of all humanity within it. The Conservatives have no plan on pollution. They have no plan to fight the climate crisis. So you have these two voices, one that is discrediting climate crisis, discrediting a price on pollution, and then we have the Liberals who are mismanaging the process that has a price on pollution in it right now currently. So it's an important factor. We need action on it, but the Liberals are just, once again, they're mismanaging something that is vitally important to all of our survival.
Yeah, and Rachel, MPs are back on the Hill. The House is back next week. So how do you think this plays out when they reconvene?
So we've already heard from the Conservatives that they're going to be making this an issue. There's 2 opposition days next week that the Conservatives are going to be dominating the agenda, forcing the NDP and the Bloc to vote on motions. One specifically is going to reference the 70% of premiers who want the April 1st hike axed. And so it'll be interesting to watch if the other parties line up behind the Conservatives on that. The Conservatives are now threatening, depending on the outcome of that vote on Wednesday, what would happen Thursday, Friday. Could we see more votes? One extremely nerdy procedural point, the government has recently moved to change the rules so we wouldn't see another marathon overnight filibuster.
Right.
They have these health breaks now, so you wouldn't see them in burning that midnight oil. But certainly they're coming back invigorated by more and more premiers getting on side with Conservatives on wanting that April 1st hike gone. So I think it's definitely going to be a dominating issue next week.
Yeah, Sabrina, one of the things that I thought was interesting is how the Prime Minister said that if they pause the price on carbon, it will mean less money in the pockets of Canadians. Now, it's math that most people can't really get their heads around. So have they been doing a bad job of actually explaining this kind of math to Canadians? Because I don't think a lot of people understand the economics of it, that I'll pay into this, but I'll actually get more out of it, and it's better for the environment.
I think that there's certainly some better communications that could be around how the carbon tax does actually benefit Canadians, not only in the short term when we talk about the rebate, but also in the long term when we talk about the actual mitigation of the effects of climate change and the long-term prices you're going to pay. There's a video on TikTok right now. Some might say tic-tac-toe. But I think that's the best PR that the Liberals have on this right now, is somebody explaining to people exactly what the price breakdown is, right? And I think the idea that the carbon pricing is overwhelmingly causing the affordability crisis in your life needs to be debunked. And if it is so big and all of these things are causing, these massive affordability crises in people's lives, then you look at Alberta and you look at, Pierre Poilievre's co-conspirator, Danielle Smith. Why is she also increasing the fuel tax? Why are these things happening at the provincial level while at the same time Conservatives are trying to say, well, it shouldn't be happening at the federal level? So I think there's a lot of different moving pieces here in terms of debunking the myths to Canadians about what exactly is costing them this affordability crisis. I do think it's incumbent on the Liberals to maybe show that in the budget.
I've got about 90 seconds left. I'm going to try and get the other 3 in on this. Melanie, what about that communications strategy? Does it need to be better?
The math isn't mathing, as they say. The communications are really difficult on this because Canadians are feeling it in their pocketbooks. I encourage Canadians, especially those who have natural gas for home heating like I do, take a look at your energy bill for the past month or whichever one you've got handy, and you'll notice that you're also being charged GST or HST, depending on your province, on top of the carbon tax. So the government is double dipping on the carbon tax, and you're paying twice for it. So the Canadians know, this just isn't adding up, and it's not doing anything to fix the climate.
Do we need a flow chart or something, Gerdetin, or something simple that everybody can digest so we can understand how it works?
Well, keep in mind that the way that this legislation came out was that the federal government gave provinces the option to create their own price on pollution, and provinces, many of them, like in Ontario, refused to, and then they had one imposed upon them. Let's look at Manitoba right now with Premier Wab Kinew recognizing there's a climate crisis, recognizing there should be a price on pollution, but wanting to have a system that is more specific to Manitoba. So this is the issue. A lot of these Conservative premiers are complaining because they didn't actually act to put in the best policy for their province when given the option.
Rachel, last word to you. Who's to blame for the communication snafu here?
That is a great question. I feel like there's a bit of a logic miss here. You know, you're talking about the Prime Minister saying today, everyone's talking about the tax, no one's talking about the rebate. Well, I think the logic a lot of Canadians are considering is, well, if you didn't tax me in the first place, you wouldn't need to rebate me. Why don't you just call it square, put that money into something else?
We'll call it even, right?
Right? So I think that's a bit curious about it, because I'm sure Canadians are doing that amount of calculation themselves. So I think there is probably some finessing there in terms of don't worry, we're going to give you back the money we took, maybe a bit more, it's all good. Maybe just don't take it in the first place. I think a lot of Canadians are probably asking that question.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Canadians are wondering why we're doing math on this show. Well, we have to sometimes.